Momodora Moonlit Farewell is a new game in the Momodora series and was only just released on January 11th. Now, for those that don't know, the Momodora series slash games are all Metroidvania games, but let's start with the story for the game. According to the Steam page, the game takes place 5 years after Momodora 3, and as Momo, you are set off on a quest to defeat a bunch of demons that were summoned there after a mysterious bell is heard, and so you can secure your safety for the village. Now, as for the story, that's actually in the gameplay. At the start, the game kind of does bait you into thinking that your village might play a bigger part in the story, since the game does encourage you to talk to the villagers and get to know some of them, and do maybe a side quest for one or two of them at the beginning. And as for the side quests for the village, there's not really much. Any side quests in the game are going to be much later, with them mainly just being you going and getting something or exploring the map in the same way you normally would. With only one notable one being where you need to sort of backtrack, but it does reward you with a boss fight. And after you leave the village, you pretty much don't ever need to go back there again. That night really is inconvenient to try and go back there during the main game, since you don't unlock fast travel until a bit later in the game near one of the final dungeons or areas. Also, a bit of a side note, I forgot that you need to hit the bell shrines to reset your healing, so I thought you had to pay the 50 points at the bell shrines to regen mana and health instead of just hitting them, which I think that would have actually been a nice idea for a special mode or hardcore mode. And for the combat to start, there was a spin-off game of Momodora called Minoria that came out between this and Reverie Under the Moonlight. One thing I really wish they brought back was the ability to parry without moving, or to parry midair. I'm not sure why they backtracked on that combat mechanic, but it would have been helpful for a couple of the later bosses. One, for example, being a boss that has an attack moving at you vertically while sometimes attacking directly at the floor, so with bad timing, you might not necessarily be able to avoid the attacks. Aside from that, this game does simplify the combat a bit from the last two games. With Minoria, you had different weapons that had slightly different attacks and special abilities. In Reverie and in Minoria, you were able to equip different items in addition to your healing. So in this game, your kit consists mainly of your melee weapon, the bow, and your healing item. And one more ability you do get later on that essentially just puts you into a sort of buffed state for a few seconds. So the combat is serviceable, but I really am disappointed with these slightly toned down combat abilities and removal of other abilities. Otherwise, the combat again is serviceable and will be familiar to anyone that's played any of the other Momodora games. As for the map, there is a good variety of different environments. They won't be spending too long in each one. It'll take you about an hour to get through each one if you're taking your time. As for the actual map, it provides you with quite a bit of information. Each area is color-coded so you'll know exactly where and when you're entering a new area. And when you're entering a new square as well, it'll tell you via what color it is. And the map will show you if there are any secrets left in an area indicated by a question mark. Well, if you haven't been to a certain square, it doesn't really indicate where you haven't been, just like any other normal Metroidvania. And the backtrack in this game isn't too offensive either, since the map does show a lot of information. And so the game actually does have fast travel later on, and does help reduce some backtracking when exploring the map and trying to get 100%. And to go back to the combat for a moment, most of the bosses aren't all too hard to beat, as they have fairly simple attack patterns. Especially the last few bosses you fight right before the end of the game. The second had trouble with being a harder version of the earlier boss. And there's not really too much to say about the bosses, except they are pretty fun to fight, even if the difficulty is at least a little lacking on normal. And a spoiler about the postgame, so skip a few seconds ahead if you don't want to hear this about the bosses. After you beat that game, there is a new challenge area that will open up, which allows you to fight the harder versions of all these bosses. The main difference being that these bosses are scaled up to be able to tank your in-game damage, and there will be either squares that show up on the arena that if touched instantly kill you, and another being that little squares will be getting shot out from certain parts of the map that also instantly kill you if touched. Now I do want to talk about the end credits for just a moment. The credits do show a moment from each of the previous Momodora games, but I am a little bit disappointed that there wasn't any Minoria representation in the credits, since I think it is my favorite in the series technically. But overall, Momodora Moonlit Farewell is an excellent Metroidvania that I would say honestly serves as a great entry point for anyone trying out the genre, or that wants to try out the Momodora games. The game isn't all too hard and is a very intuitive experience, with a satisfying experience collecting items and finding other secrets. And since the stories are mostly disconnected, you won't need to worry too much about having much context from the other games, especially since the games have such a long release window in between them. Overall, I would give the game about a 7 out of 10, since the game does make quite a lot of advancements in general accessibility, for newer players, but the simplified combat of the game making it a little bit slightly a hollower experience. Thank you for watching my video. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. And hey, if you enjoyed this video, maybe go check out one of these other videos as well if you want to go ahead and see more.